for the TEC, looking from this reward system perspective, we were having a lot of very exciting activity for a long time with praise. And then there was an episode that was the praise debates that led us to look and analyze so much of the data that we had from praise. That was like a year of data, more or less. So for who doesn't know, a brief introduction to praise is praise is a system, a reward system where you can dish praise to any contributor in the community as long as they're in the Discord server. So you dish praise for something they did that you appreciate. So it's kind of like an act of gratitude. So I dish praise for Peter for giving such a great introduction of the program. And that is recorded and through a bot, and then it goes, well, in the past it went to a spreadsheet, and then the spreadsheet had all the praises, and those praises were quantified by 3 or 4 people that would come every 2 weeks to do that. And why did they need to be quantified? Because it was a very subjective information that needed to be quantified in an objective way. So we needed that human bridge to do that. And this process worked in a very interesting way for most of our cultural build process. And during this praise debates, there was a lot of questioning on how this was being done, were the results representing what we really wanted. We needed to consider that the praise wasn't only a reward system for financial value, but also for governance. And was that balanced out? Like, were we having a good distribution of governance in this initial token distribution? Because praise turned into TCH tokens. That was our initialization token. So from there, so many questions emerged, and that was one of the things that made us spin this program also, because there was so much momentum there. And now the system is evolving a lot. So we are building a dashboard, and we are combining praise with source cred and having like this subjective stream together with the more objective stream of rewards, trying to capture the value of the community in general, like all of the granular value that is produced and delivered by everyone. So yeah, it's been very exciting to have 4 groups working on this now, and having many fresh perspectives on how can we understand the system, the TEC system, based on the data set. And I think we're having many interesting insights because of the subjective nature of the praise data set. I think people that are not familiar with the TEC can have a look almost like straight into the soul of it, because there's so much of qualitative information coming with these data sets.
So I can go next, talking about what we brought as cases for the researchers. We had 2. One is kind of just hoping to learn from the praise system and sharing what we've done with our tip bot, which is a little bit different, although very similar in goals. I think we actually had more of a focus on responses to messages and rewarding positive contributions in the chat directly, rather than searching outside of the chat, which I think is worth considering because of how impactful the praise system has been for acknowledging contributions outside of the more visible environments like the chat. We also had those kind of financial incentives already built into the tip bot, so we have the text data and amounts from all the tipping activity for the researchers to explore and dissect to better understand why people are tipping and whether it's valuable for the system in terms of healthiness and and other considerations. But we also brought the Sputnik DAO data, which is like our V1 DAO framework. We now have like the V2 platform I mentioned earlier called Astro DAO, and you can see how phase 3 might lead to new developments with Astro. But in phase 1, we just focused on Sputnik DAO because it had a lot of data from this year. We launched around February at ETH Denver. It was kind of like our first big moment. And since then, distributed quite a lot in funding through proposals and various councils voting on those proposals with small groups, each member with 1 vote. And the takeaway so far has been that initially we had 1 DAO called the Community Squad responsible for distributing funds to DAOs across our ecosystem. And that has evolved into multiple DAOs responsible for that kind of redistribution. And really, the councils are typically voting the same way. So the first person votes, and then others will follow suit. And that leads to the conclusion, which is a need for balance of powers. And that is why our idea of ecosystem DAOs, plural, now requires more of a DAO to DAO coordination. And we're using an idea called multi-DAO governance to address that need. And happy to delve into that more, but the Governauts DAO is an example of a multi-DAO as part of the research DAOs in our ecosystem. And we're hoping to connect, collaborate, and create with all of you and every Governout out there.
Roberto, are you with us?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I was just unmuting myself here. Yeah, great to join you guys. And yeah, I thought I would just, talk a little bit about our case. We didn't really bring it forward as much as Tech reached out to us with a proposal, which was really fantastic to see. We had been discussing a lot of ways to contribute with other DAOs, and I think this is perhaps one of the first, as James put, ecosystem DAOs that have reached out to us and are collaborating towards improving our reward system. To give a little bit of background on that, Ocean DAO was specifically built for the purpose of as a grants DAO. Its main goal is to enable Ocean token holders to vote and distribute those fundings across key initiatives inside Ocean Protocol. We really believe that growing from this bottom-up approach will be how Ocean DAO will likely scale much greater than all other efforts being done inside of the organization. But we're still young in terms of the structure and all components that exist within Ocean DAO. To expand on that, so far we've had mostly exterior projects that want to build inside of the Ocean ecosystem come in for a grant. We have now expanded to include working groups that are trying to tackle particular missions and outcomes within the Ocean DAO ecosystem itself. An example of that is just we have a proposal grant system, but we do not have a group of stewards that are helping to take each project, understand the different verticals inside of Ocean Protocol, and help to guide and provide assistance to all these projects while strengthening the network. So, the grants program has now been running for 9 months. We have built a proof of concept system to handle all the projects coming in. We've introduced certain systems so that teams can produce updates and continue to grow their grant accessibility so that they can continue to scale within the ecosystem. One of the key drivers was making sure that we could identify which projects are gaining traction and then continue to increase funding so that we can provide access to that capital in as efficiently as possible. But it's been a journey. It's been very interesting to try to grow the number of proposals coming in. And it's been really great to now have a token engineering come and see, take a look at these systems that we're building, because we are planning to grow much further than just being a grants DAO, in the sense that eventually teams may be getting, core teams currently may get funded by the DAO in the future. And there are additional systems of governance that need to exist, like this working group that stewards projects towards the grant system and towards improving the network. And we're currently starting to deploy these working groups and new pods of teams that are aiming to accomplish certain objectives. So in many cases, we do have other DAOs inside of our ecosystem, but perhaps they're not so aimed towards focusing on delivering these DAO outcomes that we're looking for. So outside parties that are looking for funding and accessing the grants program. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers where we're at the moment. So I'll pass it back to Livia at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, did you have some questions, Angela? I saw you taking notes. But I can
all
also...
good. Maybe we have some comments from the audience. I mean, you guys have been working on the cases now across several weeks.
Yeah, I think there was an interesting observation from Roberto, and James and I had a chat the other day, and I think there was a clear distinction between near DAO, near ecosystem wanting to look more into DAO to DAO collaborations, and Ocean DAO looking more into the grants and how this progressive decentralization could happen, and TEC being more focused on granular contributions that are delivered peer-to-peer. And I think these are like some of the three main focuses for reward systems that we've been identifying in the program in general, that grants, DAO to DAO, and peer-to-peer are somehow an overview of the reward systems in the DAO space. So yeah, I thought also the data from each project gives a perspective into what we are trying to achieve in each case. And I think the Near DAO, for example, has such a complex structure that a lot of what participants were doing in the first place was to map it out, and then from there see the flows of the rewards that happens between DAO to DAO. And at Ocean, there was an interesting observation Roberto did that was, we were thinking people were going to focus more directly on the grants and what was happening on the behaviors of the grants and how they were being distributed. But a lot of people started looking at Ocean core team and how rewards were being managed from the core team to the DAO or in the core team itself, and how I think in the DAO space, it's so like things are so interconnected that if you start looking at the core team and then you go to the grants, that will always offer some type of insights that are important for that, like for that objective that was in the first place, to identify what are the best things from the grants system and what needs to be improved. Maybe you guys can want to comment on those points.
I think, going into more of like the commonalities, because you did a great job explaining like how it all comes together from different angles. I think a few themes came to mind in our conversation and throughout this research initiative. One is responsibility and kind of balancing that efficiency and effectiveness when it comes to measuring success in itself, or the actual reward system being implemented. Then another would be kind of like the dynamic of inclusivity and exclusivity, and wanting to maximize inclusivity with respect to the kind of responsibility that I just mentioned. And then another set of words would be fairness and wisdom. I think that's kind of like the ultimate vision for, you know, increasing wisdom, like Angela said earlier in the call. I think if we have more wise participants in DAOs, then DAOs will be more likely to succeed. And when it comes to fairness, it's a balance always, and that requires wisdom.
Actually, we have a couple of questions in the chat. So may I pick some of them? So first one, I go step by step. James from Grace. Hi, Grace. Why is it not desirable to have people copy votes? In the real world, people do wait to raise their hands and see what the leader is voting. So you said the council votes.
It's not a bad thing. It's just one thing. So if you trust a council, then it's potentially a really good thing for efficiency, and hopefully that effectiveness or success. But when it comes to, you know, understanding the diversity of an ecosystem and reflecting needs, or, you know, kind of projecting your ideas of what is needed onto the community, I think it's good to have a balance of powers in that way. You're actually involving more people, so you have a better understanding of the needs, and the goals resulting from the needs, hopefully, but also strategic goals. But yeah, the idea of councils, as Grace knows, Grace being from my team, she's the head of community at NEAR. So looking at how we can expand and really decentralize to empower communities to decide for themselves will help increase that efficiency ultimately, and not only efficiency, but also will be more responsible to the communities, because they're more involved with their own ecosystems within our ecosystem. But it's not one way or the other, it's always both.
Right. And there's a second question from Jeremy. Hi, Jeremy. How are tiered reward systems created within the DAO ecosystem? I'm not sure, Jeremy, to what are you referring to a particular DAO here? Is this done through proposals, or is it written in the smart contracts? Tiered reward systems, Jeremy.
I'm not sure if maybe they're referring to the stuff inside of Ocean DAO.
Yeah.
But we do, yeah. So we don't actually have that inside of a smart contract. Everything is within a proof of concept still. Everything's written in JavaScript running on a server somewhere. But basically, it could be built into the smart contract, and we could set up the tiers so that they could be perhaps parameterized, and people could vote on the different tiers in excess of funds, similar to earmarks. That's another thing that, you know, we've been discussing a lot, and identifying whether there are parameters that people can configure, or which council owns what decision making. But yeah, basically tier rewards are just the more you contribute to the community, and the more times you manage to complete a grant and come back to continue to grow, we continue to expand the type of funding and accessibility that you can reach. So at least that is how we define it inside of Ocean DAO. And the success metric is grant completion.
Okay. Thanks. And let me pick up a third question. Grace again. To Roberto, what do you mean by gaining traction?
So I think we've just had a lot of you know, projects that have come and gone. And we've had identified previously that the success metric or traction is your ROI is greater than 1 as a generalization, and it's up to you to define your value, your metrics that you're delivering against. But basically, it just means that you have set out some sort of metric for success for yourself, and you are constantly proving and validating against that. That's basically it.
All right, thanks. Let's check if we have more questions in the Zoom. All right, not at the moment. Yep.
To build on the answer Roberto gave about the hierarchies, I wanted to mention the multi-DAO structure gives you opportunities to submit proposals and join another DAO as a DAO. And so that is a way to create such hierarchies. And they can even be like a circular partnership where both DAOs join each other and vote on each other's proposals. So it's not necessarily a top down or bottom up, but rather, like I usually say, it's both, and we have that ability to do it without changing the smart contracts.
Yeah, and I think that's something that our approach has a lot, it's less structured. So people are just organizing themselves, however they see as appropriate. Based on AstroDAO, it seems like there are perhaps a lot of tools being given to groups so that they can actually form their own DAO and measure themselves as an organization, whereas we have focused exclusively on the grant creation, review, voting systems, and so we've experienced this behavior organically, and emergently within the ecosystem itself. And we are generally very much supportive towards that. We want to see teams grow, and we want to see bigger groups of people working towards specific outcomes. And yeah, I think in terms of structure, I think that's something that's very important to continue to steward, which is, an organic way for teams to self-organize and coordinate, but without us really getting in the way. And I think that's a big part of where Ocean DAO is, because again, our governance was always designed to be narrow, meaning that token holders are only really voting on how the grants are distributed. But in terms of how the organization actually needs to coordinate, we have such large needs from the community to address specific outcomes. Like I mentioned before, just having a good council that can review projects and provide the right support for them. That's been mostly an internal centralized process. And at that point, it just becomes unscalable. So it's just, we've been taking a look at all of these processes and verticals within the organization and really asking ourselves, is this, can we tackle this efficiently? And I think the answer is usually no, right? It's two people in a room cannot make decisions for, hopefully hundreds or thousands of people. So we really need to start working towards these more organic ways for people to self-organize and relinquish power and responsibility, so that, as James mentioned, we can continue to maintain efficiency by making sure that the right people are able to execute on the decisions that they know are important to their own, to that particular outcome.
Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No,
I think also how we talk about polycentric governance is interesting to think about polycentric reward systems and how they emerge based on necessity of how you need to distribute things. And it's also a good way to make things transparent. Like most of the reward systems, because they gather data, they are a great tool for transparency and just for data analysis in general. And then it creates this feedback loop for us always to be looking into the health of the ecosystem based on actions that are happening that came from necessity. I think it's interesting too that Roberto was talking about how they're thinking about using Coordinate in the working groups that are starting to be formed. And that is already giving power, like letting people reward each other when the rewards came from a more centralized entity at some point. It's a step towards distribution of power, decentralization, and transparency all at the same time, and that all of the systems can coexist, and that the communication between them is like actually a great overview of the community in general.
Yeah, I thought I would just expand on that. You know, I think one of the what I've been noticing, or at least what I've been kind of trying to drive towards, is we have a lot of fragmentation between these different groups that are operating within Ocean DAO, and you know, we have some groups that are fairly active, but they don't get enough visibility, or they have very different tools than everybody else. And there's even fragmentation if you want to help one group and then you go and join another. And as a DAO, we're not providing enough visibility or support systems to some of these organizations. So, you know, similar to HydraDX, we do want to offer some tooling. I think we've just been calling it scaffolding, or, you know, working group or DAO scaffolding, so that we can deploy this basic infrastructure that can support both the social and more softer ways for how people collaborate. So I think Coordinate is a great tool that reflects that. And we're also trying to identify tools that are perhaps a bit more quantifiable and objective, such as source cred, so that we can play a balance of these things, provide the right tooling for everybody so they can be autonomous and self-sufficient, but at the same time try to provide some sort of scaffolding that can be versioned, or perhaps you know, deployed very easily, so that we can empower teams while providing some base structure that would then allow any participant to come in and then go from one working group or another and have somewhat less friction, in addition to have all these particular tool sets that generate all the data and allows us to have a better understanding of how all of these different groups are organizing and doing work.
Yeah, I think it's a trade-off always in several directions, with one side being a structured, perhaps, you know, multi-DAO governance approach. It gives more accountability, but it is kind of more of a structure, and it loses some of that organic, emergent, you know, community-driven participation outside of the structure. And so you might want to think about adaptive accountability and how you change the structures as really the most important aspect of your governance system, and deciding how to decide, but also deciding how to change, and, you know, how to reassess, or, you know, ask questions, challenge assumptions, and really, like, make sure you're not entrenching yourself, as mentioned in the chat.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that even mechanisms like somebody, Kisho here, mentioned rotating councils, or different mechanisms for continuously restructuring the group and having their ability to grow organically. I think with regards to scaffolding has been mostly, is there something that we can version, and then we can allow everybody to have, so empower people to have the tools that they need while still providing them with full autonomy. So if you don't want to do this, that's perfectly fine. But if you do want to use it, you know, here are systems that we support. And if you do use it, perhaps there are people that are building systems on top of it that are then easily integrated and leveraged. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not the best person to make all the decisions. So, you know, we don't want entrenchment. And I think that's a big thing that we've been kind of going over, is just how to move from this centralized team that's, you know, making kind of decisions for everybody, to really creating a worker group that we can invite many participants from the ecosystem that have really contributed over time, and bring them onto the conversation, so that we can have really candid discussions about, as you said, you know, decision-making processes and governance, and creating systems so that everybody participates, and we don't have a situation where any one person's there for perhaps too long, or we can include other participants in a way that's fair and equitable for everybody.
Yeah, just last thing on that point, also on the accountability that James mentioned. One of Ostrom's principles is mutual monitoring, and mutual monitoring usually sounds like some type of surveillance. I think usually there is this bad connotation to it, that you're going to be looking at what others are doing. But with the praise system, we understood that we would be creating a positive mutual monitoring loop, because people would be looking at what each other are doing, but from a perspective of gratitude. So it's almost like calling someone out for being awesome, and there's that happening with everyone, and this dynamic gives information. So also she says that nobody wants to be a monitor, but the benefit of being a monitor is because you get so much information on that system, and information is the most precious resource. And when people understand that, they know so much better how to, they feel like they belong, and they know how to move inside of the system in a better way. So I think praise for the TEC really gave this powerful combination of like giving information and a mutual monitoring perspective from a positive loop.
Yeah, I think culture is the main reason that I'm here, that we're here to learn from the Token Engineering Commons and other collaborators involved. And I really hope that our ecosystem can benefit from learning more together. And the culture is something that I believe enforces that, gratitude instead of an attitude with a negative connotation.
That's great. One of the main things that I have always been very happy as soon as I saw the tech was this focus on positive actions and rewards and gratitude, and just being such a positive culture and community. And I agree more with James, that I think that's one of the biggest wins that we have when an ecosystem DAO comes in and starts participating, because it is such a big impact on the culture and the different philosophies and value systems that they bring and share with the community. So I definitely feel like, at least in Ocean DAO, I felt like we were a bit insular in terms of the type of cultural connections that we had, and how the ecosystem was maturing. And I think that having the tech join us has been tremendously valuable. And I've been, very happily taking a lot of influence and reflections from, whether it's how other DAOs are organizing themselves, or value systems, or just how people are really working together, because it feels sometimes very closed off, Ocean DAO, in terms of some of the groups and how people are working together, and other DAOs just seem so inclusive. And I think there's so many things that we can learn from others. So these contributions have been very helpful. So yeah, I just want to again add on top of what James said, that the cultural impacts and the value generation that came when things that are very intangible, I think is really perhaps some of the biggest wins that we'll have, over the long run. We're here to understand reward systems, but it's impossible to quantify the cultural impact that bringing other DAOs have and add to the ecosystem. And I think that although we can't measure it, it is incredibly impactful.
So on that note, thank you. And I think, do we have more time?